I was waiting for the bus, clutching my worn purse against my lap, when the phone rang. My only son, Daniel, was on the line. His voice was sharp, without a drop of tenderness, and he said, "Mama, I don't want you to be upset, but we already sold your small bookstore and your sewing machine. We needed quick money. Tomorrow we're leaving for Asia. Goodbye." And then he hung up, just like that. 8 decades of living, raising him, giving every ounce of strength I had, and he tossed me aside with a single cold sentence. But as I sat there under the gray sky, something inside me did not break. I smiled faintly, because my boy had no idea who his mother really was or what I still had in my hands. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 82 years old, a widow for nearly a year now. My husband, Samuel, passed away quietly one evening while watering the garden. He had been a retired carpenter, a man with calloused hands but the gentlest heart. His last words to me were simple: "Don't ever think you're alone." At that time, I didn't understand what he meant. Since his death, Daniel had been appearing often, or so I believed. He came by to check on me, to take me to the market, even to urge me to see a doctor. I thought his sudden closeness was love. Now I knew it was convenience. He had been circling, waiting, planning. The bookstore had been my pride for nearly 30 years. Samuel and I opened it when Daniel was just 10. We sold secondhand novels, school textbooks, and later poetry collections from local writers. People in the neighborhood used to call it Evelyn's Corner of Dreams. Every holiday, families would pass through, and children would sit cross-legged on the floor reading fairy tales. To Daniel, it was just a pile of bricks to be traded for cash. And my sewing machine, my mother's gift on my wedding day, had traveled with me through decades of repairs, quilts, and baby clothes. I still kept scraps of fabric with Samuel's initials embroidered. Daniel knew what it meant. And yet he sold it as if it were nothing. As the bus finally pulled up, I climbed aboard with slow but steady steps. I felt no tears. What I felt was a strange calm, the same calm that had come over me the day Samuel slipped that sealed envelope into my hand, just a week before his passing. "Evelyn," he had said, "when you feel ready, open this." Not before. I had tucked it away in the drawer under my sweaters and nearly forgotten, until that call from Daniel reminded me that my Samuel always planned ahead. My son thought he had stripped me of everything, but Samuel had left me a secret that would change everything. The bus rumbled through the streets, while I sat near the window, watching people hurry with their bags, their secrets, their losses. I clutched my purse tighter. My son believed I had been reduced to nothing, but soon he would learn that nothing could be further from the truth. And for the first time in months, I felt not grief, not despair, but determination. I was ready to open that envelope. When I stepped off the bus and walked the familiar cracked sidewalk leading to my small house, my legs trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of memory. That house had been my nest for over half a century, every corner infused with the smell of Samuel's woodwork and the echoes of Daniel's childhood laughter. I unlocked the door slowly, listening to the creak that Samuel never wanted to fix, saying, "It reminds me we're home." Inside, the air felt heavy with silence, but it was a silence I had grown used to. I set my purse down, poured myself a glass of water, and then, without hesitation, went straight to my bedroom. The envelope was still there, resting quietly beneath layers of folded sweaters that smelled faintly of lavender. I held it in my hands, tracing the curves of Samuel's neat handwriting. To Evelyn, it read, "Nothing more." For a moment, I felt fear, as if opening it would break the last thread that tied me to him. But then I remembered Daniel's cold words, and my resolve hardened. I sat on the bed where I had slept beside Samuel for decades, where we had whispered secrets and shared dreams. Slowly, I tore the envelope open. Inside were several documents and a letter. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper and recognized his writing. "My dearest Evelyn," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Please forgive me for not telling you everything. I wanted to protect you from burdens. For many years, I quietly invested what little we had. I wanted to ensure that you would never struggle, Not even if Daniel turned away from you. You must know, Evelyn, that you are far richer than you think, not only in spirit but also in truth. I blinked rapidly as tears blurred my vision. I laid the letter aside and looked through the documents. Property deeds, bank certificates, and even shares in businesses I never knew existed. Samuel, a man who spent his days shaping wood into tables and chairs, had been quietly shaping our future as well. There was a deed to a lakeside cabin in the north, an apartment complex near the university, 2 small shops in the city center, and even farmland inherited from a cousin I barely remembered. Samuel had placed all of it under the name of a company called Carter Holdings, and according to the papers, I was the sole heir. The shock hit me like a wave. For years I believed we lived modestly, scrimping to pay bills, saving pennies in jars, and patching clothes until fabric gave way. But Samuel had been turning those pennies into a fortune in silence. The letter continued, "I kept this from you because I wanted your heart to remain free of worry. I knew our son might one day let ambition cloud his love, and I could not allow him to use us as a means to an end. Everything belongs to you, Evelyn, but be wise. Do not let bitterness guide your steps. Use what I have left to protect yourself and to live with dignity. And remember, my love, you were always stronger than you believed." I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed quietly, but these were not the sobs of despair. They were the release of months of grief, blended now with relief and gratitude. Samuel had not abandoned me. He was still guiding me from beyond. I spread the documents across the quilt, studying each one carefully. There were numbers I had never seen in my life, amounts, in bank accounts that seemed unreal. I realized that Daniel's betrayal, as sharp as it was, had not destroyed me. Instead, it had awakened me. My son thought he had left me with nothing but loneliness. He had no idea his mother was, in truth, the owner of far more than he could ever comprehend. That night I walked through the house touching old furniture, framed photographs, and even the worn curtains Daniel used to complain about. For the first time in almost a year, the shadows no longer frightened me. They felt like Samuel's arms around me, urging me to rise, and I promised myself that I would. The next morning I woke before the sun, the sky still painted with the pale gray of dawn. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the heavy weight of emptiness pressing on my chest. Instead, I felt an energy I thought had long left my bones. I brewed myself a pot of strong coffee, just the way Samuel liked it, and sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out before me. The numbers and legal terms danced before my eyes, confusing at first, but the more I read, the clearer it became. Samuel had arranged everything with precision. He had not only built wealth, he had built a shield around me, carefully structured so that no one, not even Daniel, could easily strip it away. I realized then that I needed guidance. I couldn't walk into this world of contracts and corporations alone. I needed someone I could trust. I remembered Mr. Green, the lawyer who had handled Samuel's retirement papers years ago. He was a quiet man with kind eyes, the sort who always explained things twice to make sure I understood. I hadn't seen him since Samuel's funeral, when he had pressed my hand and told me, "If you ever need help, Evelyn, call me." At the time, I thought it was a polite gesture. Now, it felt like a door Samuel had quietly left open for me. I picked up the phone and dialed his office. His secretary answered, but when I gave my name, she put me through immediately. "Mrs. Carter," Mr. Green said warmly, "I was wondering when you might reach out. How are you holding up?" I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. "I've found something, Mr. Green. Something Samuel left behind. I think I need your help." That afternoon, I dressed with more care than usual. I chose a dark blue dress, ironed carefully, and pinned a brooch to my collar that Samuel had once carved from wood. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back had strength in her eyes, a strength I thought I had buried alongside my husband. When I arrived at Mr. Green's office, housed in an old brick building downtown, I felt nervous, but he welcomed me with a genuine smile. We sat across from each other as I placed the manila envelope on his desk. He opened it, studied the contents, and his expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. "Mrs. Carter," he said slowly, "do you realize what you have here? This isn't just a little nest egg. Your husband was a brilliant investor. You are the rightful owner of properties and accounts worth far more than most people could imagine." I nodded, though inside I was trembling. "I don't want to chase riches, Mr. Green. What I want is to protect what Samuel left, and I want to do it quietly. Daniel must not know. He believes I am penniless, and for now, I want it to stay that way." Mr. Green leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "That is wise. If your son has already sold things without your consent, it means he cannot be trusted. We will secure your ownership of these assets and make sure no one can touch them without your permission." Relief washed over me, though it was mixed with sorrow. I never imagined I would need protection from my own child. We spent hours reviewing the documents. Mr. Green explained the holdings: the lakeside cabin, the university apartments, the shops downtown, the farmland, all tied neatly under Carter Holdings. He showed me how the income from rents and shares had been quietly accumulating. "Samuel must have worked on this for decades," he said. "He left you not only wealth but independence." Tears filled my eyes again. Independence. At 82, when most would see me as fragile and dependent, Samuel had given me the tools to stand tall. As I left the office, carrying copies of the documents and new instructions, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't anger toward Daniel, not yet. It was resolve. He thought I was helpless. He thought he had stripped me bare. But he had no idea that his mother was preparing to rise stronger than ever. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of Samuel's words: "Do not let bitterness guide your steps." He was right. I wouldn't let revenge consume me. But I also wouldn't allow betrayal to go unanswered. There had to be a way to teach Daniel that actions carry weight, that love cannot be traded for quick money. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought repeated in my mind. He had taken me for granted for the last time. The days that followed took on a curious rhythm, one I never imagined I would live at my age. In the mornings, I carried on the role the neighborhood expected of me, the lonely, aging widow left behind by her only child. I would sweep the porch, greet neighbors with a tired smile, and walk to the corner store for bread and milk. People would stop me, their eyes soft with pity, and ask, "Evelyn, how are you managing now that Daniel's gone?" I would nod slowly and answer, "I'm doing the best I can." They offered casseroles, rides to the doctor, even small envelopes with money. Their kindness touched me, but I accepted little, because I knew the truth. Behind closed doors, I was not the fragile woman they thought. Behind closed doors, I was a woman with resources, a woman with a plan. In the afternoons, I became someone else entirely. I spread Samuel's documents across the kitchen table like maps of a new world I was learning to navigate. With Mr. Green's guidance, I began signing papers, transferring titles into my direct name, and setting up accounts where only I held the keys. I learned to read bank statements and stock reports, things I once thought belonged only to young men in suits. Samuel had believed in me enough to prepare all of this, and I would not let his faith go to waste. Every day I felt a little stronger, a little less afraid. Meanwhile, Daniel remained silent. Weeks passed without a single call or message. I imagined him and his wife Clara, sipping cocktails under foreign skies, spending what they thought was their victory money. I pictured them laughing, congratulating themselves for outsmarting the old woman. What they didn't realize was that their celebration was built on sand. And tides have a way of washing illusions away. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering when he had turned so cold. I remembered the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and stories from school. I remembered the young man who once cried in my arms when his first love broke his heart. Where had that Daniel gone? Perhaps swallowed by greed. Or perhaps I had blinded myself for too long. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Howard, stopped by while I was watering the geraniums in the front yard. "Evelyn," she whispered, "I heard Daniel sold your bookstore. People are saying you had no choice." I smiled faintly and replied, Sometimes children make decisions we don't expect. She shook her head in disapproval. It's a shame. That shop was a treasure. I nodded, though inside my heart beat with a strange satisfaction. If only she knew what treasure truly remained in my hands. I played my part well, letting the world believe I was poor and abandoned. But at night, when the house was quiet, I would walk through the rooms and whisper, "We're still standing, Samuel. They don't know it, but we are still standing." As the weeks stretched on, Mr. Green called often with updates. "We've secured the apartments near the university," he said one day. "The tenants will now pay rent directly to you. I've also taken steps to ensure the farmland is protected under your personal trust." Each call felt like a brick placed firmly into a foundation Samuel had laid. Piece by piece, my life was being rebuilt, not the life Daniel imagined for me, small and pitiful, but one of quiet strength. I didn't rush. I let him believe I was broken. Because the longer he believed that, the greater the lesson would be when the truth surfaced. At night, as I sipped tea on the porch, I looked up at the stars and spoke softly to the sky. "You were right, Samuel," I murmured. "I am stronger than I believed. And soon, Daniel will learn that too." One crisp morning, as I stirred sugar into my coffee, the phone rang. It was Mr. Green again, his voice calm but carrying a hint of excitement. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I have good news. We've successfully reversed the sale of your bookstore. The transaction was deemed fraudulent, since Daniel had no legal authority to sell it without your consent. The buyers have been refunded, and the property title has been restored to your name." I froze with the spoon in my hand, then slowly lowered it to the saucer. My bookstore, my corner of dreams, was mine again. Tears filled my eyes, not of sorrow but of triumph. I imagined Samuel smiling from above, pleased that the place where so many children discovered stories would not be erased. That afternoon, I took the bus downtown and walked toward the little shop. The windows were covered with paper, evidence of the short-lived attempt by its would-be owners to renovate it. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the memories stir within me. For a moment, I was 30 again, stacking books on the shelves while Samuel fixed a crooked sign outside. I could almost hear the bell above the door jingling as Daniel, a boy with messy hair, ran in after school. I stood there for a long time, letting the tide of memory wash over me, until finally I whispered, "We're back, old friend. We're back." Passersby glanced at me curiously, but I didn't care. The shop was part of my soul, and now it was safe. But the bookstore wasn't the only battlefront. I told Mr. Green about Daniel selling my sewing machine to Eastside, saying that tracing personal items was harder than real estate, but he promised to look into it. "Sometimes things return in unexpected ways," he said gently. "For now, focus on what we've secured." His words gave me comfort. I realized that material objects, though precious, were not the core of my strength. What mattered was the principle. Daniel had treated me as if I were disposable, and now I was proving otherwise. Still, I continued playing my part in public. To the neighbors, I remained the frail widow, struggling to make ends meet. They invited me for tea, asked if I needed groceries, and I accepted their company with gratitude. Yet, inside, I smiled at the irony. They pitied me while I quietly signed papers that made me the landlord of apartments, the owner of businesses, the woman holding more keys than they could imagine. It was like living two lives, one draped in sympathy, the other in secrecy and quiet power. And I realized I liked it that way. Then, about a month after Daniel's call, Mrs. Howard came rushing to my porch, breathless with gossip. "Evelyn," she whispered, "my cousin works at the bank. She says Daniel's in trouble. He and Clara took loans using their apartment as collateral, but it turns out the property isn't in their name. They may face serious consequences." I listened calmly, hiding the satisfaction that bloomed in my chest. Samuel's foresight had shielded us again. I thanked Mrs. Howard for her concern and watched her hurry away, eager to spread news across the neighborhood. When she left, I sat on the porch swing and let out a laugh I hadn't felt in years. Daniel had thought himself clever, but the trap was of his own making. That evening, As I sipped tea and watched the horizon bleed into dusk, I realized the moment was drawing near. Daniel believed I was powerless, yet every move he had made was leading him closer to a fall he could not escape. I didn't know when he would return from his overseas adventure, but I knew when he did, he would find a mother very different from the one he had dismissed. He would find a woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal with dignity, strength, and a hidden empire. And when the time came, he would face the truth. The weeks rolled on, and with each passing day, I felt more certain of my steps. Mr. Green called me one morning with an update that made my heart beat faster. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we've finalized the transfer of Carter Holdings. You now have full direct control over all properties and accounts. No one can move against you without your consent." I thanked him, my voice steady though inside I was trembling with relief. The shield Samuel had built was now firmly in my hands. For the first time since his death, I felt completely secure, as though he were standing beside me, nodding with quiet pride. After the call, I walked through my home differently. I no longer felt like a tenant in my own life. I stood taller, my shoulders straighter, and even the neighbors noticed. "Evelyn, you're glowing these days," one remarked. I smiled softly, saying nothing, letting them believe it was simply resilience. In truth, it was power, quiet power. I was learning to live in two worlds at once. Daniel still hadn't called. Clara either. Their silence was loud, and though part of me still longed for the warmth of a son's voice, I reminded myself of the last words I'd heard from him, words sharp enough to cut. He had abandoned me for promises overseas. But whispers from the neighborhood began to paint a different picture. Clara's cousin, who lived 2 streets over, let it slip that Daniel's business deal in Asia had crumbled. The supposed partners had taken his money and vanished. Rumors said Clara was furious, and arguments had erupted between them loud enough for hotel staff to hear. I imagined the scene, Daniel pacing, Clara shouting, both realizing the fortune they thought they had was gone. They had gambled with my life's treasures and were now left with empty hands. But my sympathy was thin. Every choice they made was their own. Still, I couldn't ignore the weight of motherhood pressing on my chest. He was my son, my only child, and, despite his betrayal, some part of me ached for him. Samuel's words echoed in my mind. "Do not let bitterness guide your steps." It was a battle between my heart and my pride, but I knew I had to remain steady. To forgive blindly was to invite further betrayal. This time, Daniel needed to learn the truth, not through my tears but through consequence. One late evening, I sat with Mr. Green again, the papers between us. "I want to prepare something," I told him. "Not to ruin my son, but to remind him that he cannot erase me so easily. I want him to face what he's done." Mr. Green studied me carefully before replying. "What do you have in mind?" I took a deep breath and answered, "An eviction notice. When Daniel returns, I want him to know that the roof over his head was never his, and that respect cannot be bought with lies." Mr. Green hesitated but eventually nodded. "If that is your decision, I will make sure it is done properly. But Evelyn, remember, once this step is taken, it cannot be undone easily." I looked straight into his eyes and said, "I am sure." He took my trust and sold it for pennies. Now he must see what trust is worth. When I left his office that night, the city lights glimmered like stars fallen to earth. I walked slowly, breathing in the cool air, feeling Samuel's presence around me. I whispered into the dark, "Your plan is unfolding, my love." He thought I was weak, but I will show him the strength you always knew I had. And in that moment, I felt the calm certainty of a storm gathering on the horizon. Daniel's return would come sooner or later, and when it did, I would be ready. The day I had been waiting for arrived with the ring of a telephone early one morning. I was still in my nightgown, sipping tea on the porch, when the call came. It was Mr. Green, and his voice carried the kind of urgency that made my heart quicken. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I've just received word from an acquaintance at the airport. Your son returned to the country this morning, alone." The word echoed in my mind. "Alone?" I asked quietly. "And Clara?" He sighed. "It seemed she stayed behind. Rumor has it they quarreled bitterly. and she left him for someone else. He looked worn, exhausted, almost defeated when he arrived. I thanked him and set the phone down gently, my hands trembling not from weakness but from the knowledge that the moment Samuel had prepared me for was unfolding at last. That afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Howard confirmed what Green had told me. She came knocking with her usual flair for news, her eyes wide as she leaned close. "Evelyn, I saw Daniel. He came back last night with just one suitcase. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. People at the airport say he was muttering to himself, pale as a ghost." I nodded politely, hiding the storm of emotions surging within me. Part of me ached for the boy I once held in my arms, while another part, the stronger part, remembered the cruelty of that phone call where he had cut me out of his life like a thread he no longer needed. Compassion and steel wrestled inside me, but steel was winning. The following day, Mr. Green visited my house with a folder in hand. He placed it on the table and opened it, revealing the eviction papers. "It is ready," he said. "The notice will be served the moment he returns to his apartment. He will have 30 days to leave, as required by law." I stared at the papers, the words blurring before my eyes. This was no longer just ink on a page. It was the embodiment of consequence, the mirror Daniel would be forced to face. "Send it," I whispered. Green gave me a long look, as if trying to measure the depth of my resolve, then nodded. "Very well." That night, sleep refused to come. I paced through my home, touching the walls Samuel had built, the photographs of Daniel as a child, the quilts I had stitched through years of sacrifice. I thought of the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, clutching picture books from the store. Where had he gone? How had ambition hollowed him out so completely? But then I remembered the sting of his words. "We already sold your bookstore. We needed the money. Goodbye." No apology, no hesitation. The memory hardened me. This was not about cruelty. It was about teaching him that even a mother's love cannot be treated like disposable currency. 2 days later, Mr. Green called again. "It has been delivered," he said. The doorman confirmed he received it personally. I closed my eyes and exhaled. "Thank you," I replied, though inside my heart was racing. I pictured Daniel unlocking his apartment door, weary from travel, only to find the notice staring him in the face. I imagined the disbelief washing over him, the frantic calls he would make, the questions swirling in his head. He would not suspect me, not yet. He would think it was some distant corporation. He would think it was a mistake. But soon, he would know. The very next morning, the phone rang. I answered, and the sound of Daniel's voice, trembling and desperate, filled my ear. "Mama, I need to talk to you. Something strange is happening. I got a letter saying I have to leave my apartment in 30 days. It must be wrong. It says the owner is some company I've never heard of, Carter Holdings. Do you know anything about this?" His voice cracked, the confidence gone, replaced by panic. I sat in silence for a heartbeat, then spoke softly, my tone steady. "That does sound strange, son. Are you sure it's legitimate?" He rushed on, not even hearing the calmness in my words. "It has to be a mistake. Everything is falling apart. Clara's gone, the business failed, and now this. Mama, please, can I come see you?" I looked out the window at the setting sun, the sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson. Samuel's words drifted back to me like a blessing. "You were always stronger than you believed." My son was coming back to me, not triumphant but broken, not with arrogance but with need, and for the first time, I realized that the power was in my hands. This meeting would decide not only our future but the lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The next afternoon, just as the clock struck 3, there was a hesitant knock at my door. I knew before I opened it who it would be. I steadied myself, smoothed my dress, and pulled the handle. There stood Daniel, shoulders slumped, his eyes ringed with dark circles, his clothes wrinkled as though he had slept in them for days. He clutched a small suitcase, the last remnant of his grand escape. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, lost and frightened, and my heart nearly broke. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stepped aside slowly, gesturing for him to enter. He shuffled in, his shoes dragging across the floor, and set his suitcase down with a thud. The silence between us was heavy, thicker than any words could slice. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Samuel once read his newspaper, and where Daniel had eaten countless meals as a child. He glanced around nervously, as if the walls themselves were strangers. Finally, he spoke. "Mama, I don't know what's happening. Clara's gone, the money's gone, and now this notice. It says I have to leave my apartment in 30 days. I swear, I thought everything was in my name. I thought I had control. But it turns out I had nothing. Nothing at all." His hands trembled as he rubbed his forehead. "I made mistakes, but I didn't think they'd cost me everything." I listened. My hands folded calmly on the table, while my heart wrestled inside my chest. Part of me wanted to reach across and cradle his face, tell him that no matter what, he was still my son. But another part of me, the part Samuel had fortified with his wisdom, knew that if I softened too soon, Daniel would never learn. "Daniel," I said gently, "life has a way of showing us what truly matters. Sometimes it does so harshly." He looked up at me, his eyes desperate. "Mama, please, you have to help me. I don't know who this company is, this Carter Holdings, but maybe you can talk to someone, find out if there's a mistake. I can't lose my home too." For a long moment, I studied him. This was the same man who had called me weeks earlier, cold and dismissive, telling me he had sold my bookstore and my sewing machine as though they were scraps to be discarded. Now he sat before me, hollowed by the consequences of his own choices. "Tell me something, Daniel," I asked, my voice firm yet calm. "When you sold what was mine, did you think of me? Did you imagine what it would feel like for your mother to be left with nothing?" He flinched, guilt flooding his face. I thought I was doing what was necessary. Clara said we needed money fast, that opportunities don't wait. I didn't think it through. I told myself you'd understand." His voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of the boy he used to be. I leaned back, folding my arms, and let silence stretch between us. The ticking clock filled the room. "Finally," I said, "understanding doesn't mean accepting betrayal. You didn't just sell wood and fabric, Daniel. You sold pieces of my life, pieces of your father's memory. You treated me as if I were already gone." His shoulders shook, and he covered his face with his hands. "I know, Mama. I know I was wrong, and now I have nothing left. Please, don't turn away from me too." I stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Samuel once tended. I remembered his words in the letter. "Do not let bitterness guide your steps." I breathed deeply, torn between love and justice. Behind me, Daniel sobbed softly, the sound both heartbreaking and strangely cleansing. I turned back to him and said, "You will not be turned away, Daniel, but you will not escape the truth either. Actions have weight, and you will carry this lesson for the rest of your days." His eyes met mine, red and swollen, and he whispered, "What do you mean?" I didn't answer directly. Some truths, I knew, had to be revealed step by step. That night, after he left to stay temporarily with a friend, I sat at the table alone, the eviction notice still burning in my thoughts. I knew the confrontation had only begun. Soon, he would discover that Carter Holdings was not some faceless corporation, but the legacy of his father, safeguarded in my hands. And when he learned the full truth, the ground beneath him would shift forever. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Daniel called me often, sometimes begging, sometimes angry, his voice swinging like a pendulum between desperation and defiance. "Mama, I talked to people, and they said Carter Holdings has owned the building for years. How is that possible? Who are these people? Why didn't I know about this?" I listened quietly, offering only small words that neither confirmed nor denied. "Life is full of surprises, Daniel," I told him once. "Sometimes the truth waits until we are ready to see it." He grew more restless, more unhinged. His arrogance was fading, and in its place grew confusion, fear, and though he would never admit it, shame. Then, one afternoon, he appeared at my door again, eyes wide, gripping a folded paper in his hand. "Mama," he said breathlessly, "I went down to the county records. I checked every file. The owner of Carter Holdings, it's you. It's you, isn't it?" He dropped the paper on my kitchen table as though it were a weapon. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. I poured myself a glass of water before answering. "Yes, Daniel. It's me." He stared at me, disbelief written across every line of his face. All this time you had everything. The buildings, the money, the land, and you let me believe you had nothing." I set the glass down and met his gaze steadily. "It wasn't about letting you believe anything, Daniel. It was about protecting what your father built. He knew if you discovered the truth too soon, ambition would swallow you whole. And look what happened when you thought I was weak. You sold the pieces of our life for coins. You left me behind for promises of fortune. Your father saw this coming. That is why he prepared." His mouth opened and closed like a child caught in a lie. Finally he whispered, "So all of this, the eviction, the company, the letters, it was you teaching me a lesson." I shook my head slowly. "No, Daniel. It was life teaching you." I only held up the mirror. He sank into the chair, his hands trembling. For a long time, silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I could see the storm of realization passing over him, the recognition of his mistakes, the humiliation of being stripped of illusions, the ache of a son who had betrayed the very person who had loved him most. "I thought I was smart," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I thought I could control everything, but I didn't even know my own mother." His words pierced me deeper than any anger could. I walked to him and placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "You still know me, Daniel. I am the woman who carried you, who raised you, who gave her life so you could have yours. But I am also the woman who refuses to be discarded. Your father left me strength, and I have embraced it. That doesn't mean I've stopped loving you. It means I've stopped allowing you to confuse love with weakness." He looked up at me, tears brimming in his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy I once knew. That evening, after he left, I sat on the porch watching the stars bloom in the velvet sky. I thought of Samuel, of his foresight, of the way he had trusted me to carry the weight of his secret. "You were right, my love," I whispered. He needed to fall to see the truth, and I needed to rise to carry it. The night air was cool against my skin, and I felt a strange peace settle over me. The confrontation was not finished. There were still decisions to be made, wounds to be healed, but the balance of power had shifted forever. Daniel now knew the truth. His mother was not a frail, discarded widow. She was the guardian of his father's legacy, and she would never again be underestimated. The following week brought a stillness to my home, though beneath it ran a quiet current of change. Daniel came to see me more often, no longer with the swagger of a man convinced of his own cleverness, but with the humility of someone who had been unmasked. He would sit at my table, shoulders hunched, hands clasped, and speak in a voice stripped of arrogance. "Mama," he said one evening, "I don't know how to make this right. I betrayed your trust. I sold the things that mattered most to you. And I left you alone when you needed me most." His words trembled in the air, heavy with shame. I listened, my heart softening, but not dissolving. "Daniel," I replied, "you cannot undo the past, but you can choose how you walk forward. Redemption isn't given, it's earned." For days, I wrestled with the question of how far to let him back into my life. Samuel's voice whispered through my memories, guiding me. "Do not let bitterness guide your steps." I knew I could not cling to anger forever. Anger corrodes the vessel that carries it. But forgiveness, too, could not be careless. To forgive without accountability was to invite the same wound again. So I set boundaries, firm and clear. I told Daniel he would need to prove his sincerity, not with words, but with actions. "Help me care for the bookstore again," I said. "Show me you remember what it means to build, rather than to destroy. Earn back your place, not by demanding it, but by honoring it." His eyes widened with both relief and fear, but he nodded. "I will, Mama. I promise." Watching him sweep the bookstore floor a few days later, clumsy and awkward, brought tears to my eyes. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of possibility. Perhaps Samuel's plan had worked in more ways than one. By letting Daniel taste the bitterness of loss, by stripping him of false triumphs, he had given him the chance to grow. Whether Daniel would truly change remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I felt the faint flicker of hope. At night, I sat on the porch with my cup of tea, the stars glittering above me like watchful eyes. I thought of my journey, from the day Samuel placed that envelope in my hands, to the moment Daniel stood in my kitchen, broken and humbled. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had not been defeated. I had been underestimated, but I had risen. And through it all, I discovered something I had nearly forgotten: the strength within me, the voice that refused to be silenced, the dignity that cannot be sold. And now, dear friends who listen to my story, I turn to you. If my journey has touched your heart, I invite you to join me here in this community. Subscribe to the channel, not just to hear my stories, but to share in them, to walk together through the lessons life gives us. Leave a comment below, tell me about your own struggles, your own triumphs. The moments when you too were underestimated and yet found the strength to rise. Did this story move you? Did it teach you something new about love, betrayal, or resilience? I want to hear from you, because your voice matters here. This is more than a story, it is a conversation, a circle of hearts learning from each other. So stay with me, subscribe, and let us keep walking together. For as long as there are stories to tell, none of us are ever truly alone.